Got a 2016 Chevy Malibu with a service power steering message. Customer states they were driving and they lost power steering. Steering is very hard to turn. It feels like we have no power steering at all. We're going to start where we always start. We're going to check codes. This is what we've got for codes. EBCM, electronic brake control module U0131, and a body control module U0131 set as current, lost communication with power steering control module. Now I'm going to use the scan tool and see if I can communicate with the power steering control module. As you can see, power steering control module also does not communicate with the scan tool. So next step, if you've ever watched any of my control module no communication videos before, next step we go to the control module wiring schematic and we're going to study that, and then we're going to come up with a plan from there. Check it out. Here's the wiring diagram for the power steering control module. Really simple. We have a hot at all times, we have a ground at all times, and we have communication circuits in and out. That little dashed line there means that there's more to the circuit that is not being shown. So let's take a look at the high-speed LAN wiring schematic. If you had noticed, you would notice that the scan tool said we were trying to communicate right here, data link connector on 6 and 14. Power steering control modules right here. We've got terminating resistor here and here. The body control module here was setting a code, and the EBCM, the electronic brake control module, was also setting a code that it could not communicate with the power steering control module. So let's go back to this diagram. It would be really easy to test at this module right here, power and ground, with a test light. The light should light. If so, then we would need to verify the communication circuits. And how do we do that? Well, probably the easiest, fastest way that I could possibly do that is right here at the data link connector with an ohm meter. If I measure across 6 and 14 with everything powered down, I should see 60 ohms because of Ohm's law. We've got 120 ohm resistor at each end, and they're both connected kind of in parallel. So if you know anything about Ohm's law, when you measure those two resistors in parallel, they should measure 60 ohms. And that would tell you right away that this entire circuit is okay. And that was one test. It's either going to tell you it's bad or good. Okay. So let's go back to this schematic in a second, because if you notice here, power steering control module, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 wires coming in and out of that module on this schematic. But back on this schematic, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Why is that? Well, we'd have to take a look at the chassis expansion bus. This is another CAN network that the power steering control module communicates on, but it communicates on 12 and 13 of the data link connector, and at the moment we are not having any communication faults on this network. So we're not going to focus on this network at the moment. We only want to focus on these circuits and these circuits, because these are the ones that the scan tool is trying to communicate, and those are the ones we are testing at the moment. That's what we're going to start with. Okay, so there's that really fast, easy test on terminal 6 and 14 I told you about, and that confirms that all of our communication circuits are good. So now I need to get access to that power steering control module and test power and ground, most likely. Here we are under the vehicle. This is the steering gear itself. That's the steering motor, and the power steering control module is inside that motor. Notice there are 3 connectors, so we need to go back to that wiring schematic and determine which of the 3 connectors we need to look at. I'm going to use a power probe so I can check power and ground using one tool. Makes it a lot easier. It makes that noise when it's hot, makes that noise when it's grounded. So we're going to go back down there and check power and ground. There's that main power and ground feed connector for the power steering control module. We got our ground at all times. We should have power at all times, but hey, we have no power on that red wire. So that would explain why the power steering control module is not awake and not communicating, is because it has no power. Let's go back to that wiring schematic and decide what to do about it. Back on our wiring schematic, we've confirmed we have a good ground at all time. We've confirmed that all of the data communication circuits are okay, and we have just found that we have no power here at the B plus feed. So clearly this is going to be really easy because we only have one fuse, and if you look, it's the fuse block on the battery, 100 amp, and since I do not have an HP4 on this vehicle, it's the F7BA fuse. So let's go take a look at the battery fuse block. Back here at the battery, here's battery positive. This here is the battery fuse block. This is the only 100 amp fuse that I see. So let me grab that power probe and test these. Okay, so everything on this side should be hot. Yep, and everything on this side should be hot also if these fuses are okay. Because that's a what? 350 amp fuse, 250 amp fuse, 80, 80, 100, and 60. So good, 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 good. That one's blown. That one's good. Okay, so now we know that we have a 100 amp fuse blown here, which would require replacement of this whole entire fuse block. What's concerning to me is why did that 100 amp fuse blow? Okay, so we decided that the 100 amp fuse is blown. The wire on this diagram is solid. That means that you are seeing the entire circuit. I have this end of it disconnected, okay? So, like I said, it's concerning. Why did that 100 amp fuse blow? Because the only reason it should or could possibly blow is if we have a path to ground. We have to have a path to ground on this cable, either through a shorted motor, shorted control module, or shorted wiring. So because I have this end disconnected, I'm going to test for any shorted wiring quickly and easily, and I'll show you how. Okay, so what I've done here, I've connected a test light to B+, so that any time that I find a path to ground, that light will light. And like I told you, if there's a short to ground, that's the only reason that 100 amp fuse should have blown. So I told you that I have the other end of this connector or this circuit disconnected. If that light lights, it means there's a short to ground. So yes, we do have a short to ground at the moment and that wiring harness. And because I have the other end disconnected, that means that the problem is definitely 100% on the wiring harness. And now from here, I need to start here, and I know where the other end ends up. It ends up down there by the power steering gear. Somewhere between that point and that point, that wire is damaged and touching ground. So now I need to find it. So the easiest way for me to find this short is to leave this light here. The whole time that light is lit, the problem is present. So I'm gonna come down here, start wiggling wiring, and I'm gonna observe that light. When that light starts to flicker or go out, it means that I found it. So I don't think I can show you all of this on video because it might be time consuming. It might be pretty difficult to find, but we will see what we see. Okay, so I'll show you the first thing that I found. I don't know if you can see that too well. There's the suspect right there, and if you follow that wire, the wire goes down right here under the battery. So it looks like somebody has replaced this battery before and incorrectly routed that wire under the battery and is most likely pinched and rubbing on this grounded bracket. So if that were true, I may be able to get my hand down there and start wiggling it. Play with the wire. Oh, what did we say? Yep, as soon as I wiggle right where it goes underneath that battery, that's our shorted wiring that caused our blown fuse and loss of power steering. Okay, here we go, big reveal. We're both going to see what this looks like together. What do we got here? There's that wire that we suspected had a problem. Looks like it was just barely pinched in the wrong spot. Most likely there's going to be a little pinhole in the insulation that you can't see. I'm going to have to cut this open and take a better look. But yeah, that's what it was. It was pinched right there underneath the battery. Somebody replaced the battery and got that wire pinched, and that's what caused it. Okay, take a look. I cut the tape back. I inspected the wire right where it was bent, and it was pinched, and I did not find anything. But I did find right here, right there. If you can see that, just a pinhole right there where it's been rubbing. You can see where it's been rubbing right there. So that just touching right there is enough to cause that fuse to pop. And it looks like we may have to replace this wiring harness. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get wiring this size to make a proper repair. I might have to cut this open and take a better look. I may need to explore my options, because when it comes to power steering, power brakes, fuel, suspension, etc., it has to be 100%. We don't do half repairs on something that may cause a loss of power steering later, and I don't want to get blamed for something like that. So I want to do this repair by the book. I'm going to have to do some research on what I'm going to need to do to repair this. Most likely going to have to replace the whole cable, which may involve replacing the engine wiring harness or whatever. So we will see. Here's a better view of the damaged wiring. As you can see, there's a little bit of a melted spot there, some broken strands. Take a better look at that. Yeah, we got some damage. And I looked up the repair procedures for this kind of damage, and they say that if the wiring inside is damaged, then you need to replace. So again, like I said, this is a power steering circuit, and I want it to be 100%. So I'm not going to attempt to repair this wire. I'm going to recommend a replacement of the whole harness, and we also must replace this. So if we had not continued our diagnostic and found that, we would have replaced this, and it would have immediately destroyed the new one. So we have to fix that. Have to fix that. They have to be done together. Okay, so here we are about 2 weeks later. I'm midway through the wiring harness replacement. Here's the pile of parts that I had to remove to replace the harness. I had to remove the starter for access. I had to remove the fuse panel, battery, etc. So this main wiring harness goes down here. I had to disconnect everything down here. Carefully pull that out. It goes underneath the intake. It routes down to the power steering. It comes back this way. So all this is now loose. I've just got to pull it out of here, and that's near impossible to do while also recording. So after I get this all replaced and put back together, we'll see what happens. Kind of a big mess, and it's going to be taking a lot of careful attention when I reinstall it to get everything routed properly. But that's what it takes to fix it right. Almost got it out. Okay, we've birthed the wiring harness from the car. And here's the problem spot on our harness. I wrapped it in tape temporarily just so that we could drive it out, but that's our damaged wiring. Here's the other end of it that goes down to the steering gear. And like I said, because it is power steering, it must be 100%, and that is why I'm replacing the whole harness. Here's the new wiring harness ready to go back in. This costs about 400 bucks. Also, here is the old battery fuse block and the new one. Remember, I told you, if you replace this without fixing the root cause of the fuse popping, you just ruin this brand new part, and this costs over $100. So definitely want to completely diagnose the problem as to why those fuses are popping before you replace this. Okay, time to go back together. Okay, so this is after I've put the harness all back in. I've been very careful about routing, getting all the retainers where they belong. All these little retainers need to go right where they go. Protects the harness from rubbing or any bending. Down here, we've got everything routed. A couple spots down there I had to take it back apart a couple times because the routing wasn't just right, and like I said, routing, it's important. Okay, got her all reassembled. I've got the old battery fuse block right here. I popped the cover off. You see that blown 100 amp fuse, that's why we're replacing this, but we also decided to diagnose why this popped before we ruined a new one. We replaced the damaged wiring harness, the bad fuse block, and that should take care of the problem. Here's the first startup after repairs. Turn that radio off. Power steering is now working. No warning lights. That probably means that I got everything connected on the first try. Okay, cool. Looks like that's all I've got. Thanks for watching.